Hello students, today I am going to demonstrate you the third ventricle. The third ventricle is present in the cerebral hemisphere, okay, between the two diencephalon. Diencephalon means between the thalamus and hypothalamus on either side, okay. So this is a narrow slit-like space of diencephalon, that is between right and the left thalamus and the hypothalamus, right and left thalamus. That means if you see a coronal section, now these two sections which I am showing you, that these are the sagittal section, mid sagittal section. So this is the right cerebral hemisphere and this is the left cerebral hemisphere. A little unequally cut here, a very little unequally, and hence some of the part got destroyed. So I will take in the most of the part the help of the book diagrams to make you understand, okay, about the third ventricle. Now, as I said that the cavity of the third ventricle is a narrow slit which can be appreciated if we take a section which is a coronal section passing through the third ventricle. So I will show you the narrow section with the help of the book. Let us see, this is the book which I have said you in the last videos also. Okay, this is the Neuroanatomy for Medical Student, written by me, published by the Wolters Kluwer, and I am thankful to the Wolters Kluwer for using their book. Okay, this is a coronal section passing through the cerebral hemispheres, right and left cerebral hemisphere. This is the corpus callosum, septum pellucidum, this is the fornix, and these are the right and the left lateral ventricles, okay, large cavities, dark cavities, lateral. And then below the fornix, you are seeing this is the thalamus of right side and this is the thalamus of left side, and in between these two thalami there is a presence of a vertical slit. That's why I said that the third ventricle. So this area is the third ventricle, which is continuous with that of the lateral ventricle above. But this is the third ventricle, narrow slit-like space. And this lower part where you are seeing that it is mammillary body, this is the part of the hypothalamus. So this is the cavity which lies between thalamus and hypothalamus, and it is a narrow slit-like cavity. Okay, this is the appearance of the third ventricle in the coronal section of the brain, okay, in the coronal section. Now the cavity of the third ventricle will communicate above, okay, with the right and left ventricle, okay, it will communicate above with the right and left ventricle, which I will show you here. This is the septum pellucidum is here, this is the corpus callosum is here, and this is the fornix is here. So just below the fornix here, this is the anterior commissure is here, and this I said that just below the fornix, this is the thalamus, and this part here is the hypothalamus, okay. And if I put my brush inside this interventricular cavity, you can see that it is going here in the interventricular cavity. So this is the third ventricle, as I said, is a narrow slit here. This is that third ventricle. The thalamus and hypothalamus, they form the lateral wall of this slit-like space, okay. And here it is above continuing with that of the lateral ventricle. You can see the lateral ventricle deep to the septum pellucidum. Now the septum pellucidum has gone to this, section, and here there is no septum pellucidum, okay, through which you can see the caudate nucleus, okay, this comma-shaped structure here which you are seeing deep inside, it is the caudate nucleus. So this is the space, okay, lateral ventricle, and this is the interventricular foramina through which the brush is going, okay, just deep to the anterior fornix, anterior limb of the fornix, just behind the anterior commissure it is here. So it is a wide gap, okay, interventricular foramina which opens below. So it communicates above with the right and the third ventricle. Since it is a single ventricular cavity in the midline, it will communicate on the right and the left side, okay. Now, it also communicates posteriorly with the fourth ventricle through the cerebral aqueduct. And what is cerebral aqueduct? It is nothing but a narrow canal in the midbrain. This part is the midbrain, okay, where am I moving my breast. This small part is the midbrain, and this is that canal, that is the cerebral aqueduct, okay, cerebral aqueduct. Now this, if you just trace this cerebral aqueduct, it is opening into this cavity, which is the cavity of the third ventricle. So it is its lower communication. Upper communication, lateral ventricle. Lower communication is that of the cerebral aqueduct in midbrain, which will open lower down, still lower down into this wide gap that is called as the fourth ventricle. Okay, so the third ventricle communicate with the fourth ventricle through this cerebral aqueduct. As this cavity is situated in the midline, see this cavity is small slit like, which it is in midline. It has two lateral walls, okay, one on right side, another on the left side. So let us see again the two lateral walls in this coronal section, okay. In the coronal section, I will just show you with the help of the book the coronal section, and you can see in this coronal section which is passing here, this is having a right lateral wall and a left lateral wall. In between this slit like space is located, which is the third ventricle, okay. So it has a right lateral and a left lateral wall. This we will see in its whole extent later, okay, in its whole extent, right and left lateral wall. Then it has an anterior wall. The cavity has an anterior wall. This is the anterior wall, okay. This is the frontal lobe, this is the occipital lobe. So frontal pole, occipital pole. So this is the genu, body, and the splenium. So now you got an orientation: midbrain, pons, and medulla. So this has an anterior wall, okay, and this will have a posterior wall, which in this specimen is broken. That's why I am forced to take the help of the book diagram to make you understand the posterior wall. So this is anterior wall, this is, here is the posterior wall, and then it will have, beside this right and left lateral wall, it will have the roof and floor. See this is the ridge onto the thalamus, and this site is the attachment of the ependyma which forms the roof. So this is the upper limit. Here it is the roof, because we have taken a mid-sagittal section, so roof is broken here. So this is the site for the roof, and then here is the floor, okay, right from the lamina terminalis. Here I will say yes, lamina terminalis and optic chiasma is this. This is the floor going right up to the midbrain, okay, right up to that of the midbrain. It is the floor is here, okay, floor is here. This is the tegmentum, right up to the tegmentum till it opens into the aqueduct, okay, it opens into the aqueduct, cerebral aqueduct. Right, so this is rough position of the third ventricle and its wall. Now we will learn the walls in details, okay. Let us come first to the anterior wall of the third ventricle. Anterior wall of the third ventricle is formed by the lamina terminalis. See this wall, this is the lamina terminalis, which extend between the anterior commissure above and below with the optic chiasma. This was the optic nerve here, and this portion is the optic chiasma. So this is the lamina terminalis, okay, and this is the anterior commissure. So this is the part of the anterior wall, and then the lamina terminalis anterior commissure, and then it will be the anterior column of fornix. This is fornix, and it is this anterior, right up to the interventricular foramina above. Okay, here is the anterior wall. So if I go downwards, so this is the anterior column of fornix, anterior commissure, and the lamina terminalis. This forms the anterior wall of this space, which is called as the third ventricle. Let us go to the lateral wall. This is the lateral wall, as I said here. Okay, the right lateral and the left lateral walls. There are two lateral walls. Okay, this is a large area. Lateral wall is a large area, and this large area is divided into the upper half and the lower half. The upper part of the lateral wall is formed by the thalamus and lower part by hypothalamus, and the demarcation line between the upper part and the lower part of the lateral wall is this sulcus, where I am just moving the tip of my this brush. You see this? It is extending between the interventricular foramina anteriorly, and as you trace this sulcus, it will go and open into the cerebral aqueduct of the midbrain. So this is called as the hypothalamic sulcus. Above is the thalamus, and below is this area that is called as the hypothalamus. This is small area. So this is the lateral wall of the third ventricle. Okay, it is Y. Now hypothalamic sulcus, as I said, begins as the interventricular foramina, and it goes right up to the cerebral aqueduct in the midbrain. In the upper part, where the lateral wall is formed by the thalamus, here you can see a tubercle-like structure which was cut in midline at the time of sectioning, and this is called as interthalamic adhesion. And this interthalamic adhesion is nothing but the mass of the gray matter which connects the right thalamus to the left. See this is the cut portion of the interthalamic adhesion into that of the left cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so this is the interthalamic adhesion. Let us, after completing the anterior wall and right and left lateral wall, we come to the posterior wall, and unfortunately most of the posterior wall is broken here. Okay, so I will take the help of the book diagram to show you the posterior wall which is broken from here. Okay, it is broken almost in both. So I will show you the posterior wall. Just a minute. Now let us see this diagram also, which is the sagittal section and which is the third ventricular cavity between the thalamus, and this part is the hypothalamus, which will also form the floor, and this is that roof. Okay, we will come back to this diagram, but then you just see the wall, that is the posterior wall here. Okay, I will show you the posterior wall. Posterior wall is formed by many small structures, and just to show this diagram I will have to enlarge this. Okay, so I am enlarging this little. Okay, so this is the enlargement of this diagram. Okay, and in this diagram I can show you that this is the posterior wall, this is the cerebral aqueduct, and this is the roof here where choroid fissure is seen, in which choroid plexus is seen just below the fornix. So from here right below the fornix up to the cerebral aqueduct beginning, this is the posterior wall. Okay, and still you can zoom in your mobile or the laptop. Okay, and then see this posterior wall which is formed by the various small structure. From above onward, it is the suprapineal recess. There will be a recess, a small depression that is called as suprapineal recess. And after suprapineal recess, this dot-like structure which is seen in the posterior wall is that of the habenular commissure. And below this habenular commissure, this is the pineal gland, and the wall of the this third ventricle here will form a recess again, what is called as the pineal recess, and this is pineal recess is present in the stalk of this pineal gland. Since in the specimen pineal gland is broken and this part is broken, I am not able to show you. Okay, so this is the pineal recess in the stalk of the pineal gland, and just below is the posterior commissure, similar to the anterior. Anterior was here and the posterior is here. So habenular commissure, pineal recess, and this is the posterior commissure. These are the main constituent of the posterior wall. Okay, posterior wall. Let us go to the roof. Okay, roof. So we have covered the anterior wall, posterior wall, lateral wall, and now we are going to the roof. And this is a diagrammatic representation. This is the third ventricle. These two are the right and left lateral ventricle. This is the septum pellucidum, and this is the fornix, which rests on to the edge of the thalamus here. In between the fornix and thalamus superior surface there lies a gap, okay, choroid fissure, and through which this radius structure which you are seeing is the choroid plexus. This is the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle, and these two are the choroid plexus of the third ventricle, which are present or they project, okay, from the roof. Okay, now this roof is formed by this bluish lining structure. And what is this bluish structure? This is the ependyma. And what is ependyma? Which lines the ventricle, all the ventricle? It is nothing but the columnar epithelium, which just lines this, the cavity of the ventricle. So this ependymal layer, it extends from one thalamus to another thalamus, that is the roof. Okay, so roof is formed by the ependyma. Okay, now through this ependyma, which is stretching between right and left thalamus here, okay, two choroid plexus, okay, they protrudes. See this one choroid plexus and two choroid plexus, they protrude inside the roof, okay, on either side of the median plane, okay, on either side of the median. So this is the narrow roof is here. So this completes the roof of the third ventricle. Let us come to the floor of the third ventricle. And floor, it is here. I can show you some of this part of the floor of the third ventricle. And the floor begins with the optic chiasma. See this? This part was the optic chiasma, in which a recess was protruding from third ventricle, optic recess. Okay, so this is the optic chiasma, which is forming the floor, and just behind the optic chiasma, broken here was this infundibular stalk. Okay, a part of it I can show you here. This was broken. Okay, this part, this is the infundibular stalk. Okay, just a minute. Yes, this was the infundibular stalk after the chiasma, and in this infundibular stalk there is also extension of the recess of the third ventricle. So this is the infundibulum, which will give attachment to the pituitary gland here. Okay, this is that it is broken here. Then there will be at the bottom of which swelling of the infundibular stalk, which is attached to this part of the brain. There will be a swelling here called as tuber cinereum. So what are the part? Optic chiasma, infundibular stalk, which is attached here, surrounded by a bulging called as the tuber cinereum, and then here will come the mammillary body. At least mammillary body is intact here. So this is the mammillary body of one side. There will be mammillary body here onto the other side. It is here. Mammillary body is here. Okay. Another mammillary body is here. Now then, after the mammillary body, what you will see here is the posterior perforated substance. Okay, this is that. Okay, I can see the pits or depressions are seen for the blood vessels. Hence, it is called as the posterior perforated substance. And beyond the posterior perforated substance, what you will get is the tegmentum. This part is called as tegmen. And upper surface of the tegmentum is covered by ependyma, forming the floor of the third ventricle. till it goes to this opening, that is of the cerebral aqueduct. Okay, sir, where I am putting my brush, cerebral aqueduct, right? So right from this cerebral aqueduct up to the optic chiasma, it is the floor of the third ventricle. So we have learned almost all the walls of the third ventricle, and the whole thing is lined by the ependyma. Even the roof is the stretching of ependyma between right and left thalami, and protruding through the roof are the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. So anterior wall, posterior wall, superior wall, that means roof, and the floor. Okay, and there are the two lateral walls. This is the third ventricle, which communicates above with the lateral ventricle and below with that of the fourth ventricle through the cerebral aqueduct. Quickly, let me show you some diagram. If they are better diagram here, so I will try to show you. Okay, if I can get some good diagram. Okay, horizontal section I have not shown you, and in the horizontal section you can also see the position of the third. This is the horizontal transverse section of the brain itself. This is the corpus callosum, this is the septum pellucidum, this is the fornix, and these are the two right and left lateral ventricle. This is the caudate nucleus in the ventricle, and then this is the right thalamus, and this is the left thalamus. See the large mass of the gray matter, right and left thalamus, and here there is, see how narrow is this slit between the right and left thalami, and you can see that this slit is nothing but the third ventricle, right? So this is that slit, third ventricle, which communicates with the lateral ventricle anteriorly through interventricular foramina seen in the coronals, in the mid-sagittal section. Okay, so this is that third ventricle. So you have seen the third ventricle presence in a horizontal section, in a coronal section, and in the mid-sagittal section. This must have given you fairly a good idea where is the location of the third ventricle and its communication anteriorly and its communication posteriorly. Thank you very much for watching the third ventricle.